All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to ATypI All Over. The next presentation is titled Conceptual Type, Conventional Type by Monica Hutama. Monica is an award-winning graphic designer currently based in France. While studying graphic design in Singapore, Monica developed a particular interest in typography, leading her to apply for the Assessment Board of International Society of Typographic Designers. In her final year of university, Monica completed her dissertation on type and earned a first class honors degree. In the following year, she became a lecturer in Jakarta teaching typography and branding. Welcome, Monica. I'll play the video now and then we'll see you again after the end.
Hello everyone, my name is Monica Hutama, and this will be my very first talk in typography. So before I start on my topic of quote-to-quote standard typography and conceptual typography, I would like to thank the ATypI team for all of the amazing team members and for this massive opportunity. I am so very honored to be able to present in front of the many audiences from all over the world, and we all love typography. And also in this talk, I would like to thank all of these amazing typographers, type designers, and authors for providing educational resources, and of course also my university professors and mentors. I would not be able to present here today if they did not pass down their knowledge and motivate me to enter this beautiful type community. I am a bit nervous because it's my very first talk. However, I hope that all of you will be enjoying this along with me. Today, we are all here whether we are type designer, typographer, graphic designer, or design and type enthusiast for the same reason, to discuss typography. And one thing that all of us have in common is that we encounter typography every single day of our lives, and we use type in so many different forms every single day, whether we realize it or not, whether we want it or not, or whether we like it or not. And it can be simply tweeting a tweet on your Twitter and sending a message on Messenger, or creating an Instagram story, or reading your cafe menu or restaurant menu. When you are driving, there are road signs. So typography is everywhere. We are literally living in a typographic world. And we all use typography as well to express ourselves. This discussion began when I was in my last year of university, when I was assigned to an ISTD project by my professor, and I was already very interested in typography, and I wonder, with this vast amount of type design, what is typography actually? How do we exactly define typography? Do we only consider something as typography when it is readable? Is it really just an aid to ease our reading process? But what if I would like to express myself differently than a Times New Roman, because I am not a Times New Roman? Everyone that knows me know that I am not a very corporate person, so defining myself with a Times New Roman would not be right. Perhaps this is where conceptual typography begins to emerge, to come into play, to aid with the expression of us. And in the past decades and centuries, there are already so many developments in typography, which we will see in a little bit. Today we will discuss typography as being quote-to-quote standard and conceptual, and how this conceptual type has changed our way of perceiving typography in general. Perhaps at the end of this talk you will have more questions than answers, but that's the point. Let's be curious. It is still a subject of debate whether or not conceptual type design exists, as Peter Bil'ak here mentioned in one of his articles on typotech.com. He said, quote-to-quote, "A typeface can't really be conceptual because it is dependent on its execution. However, whether it exists or not, one sure aspect is that the way typography is perceived, created, and appreciated has evolved substantially over the centuries and decades. And of course, to begin this discussion, let's take a look at the definitions of typography that we can find in books and in the web. And for the most basic, defined by the Cambridge Typography, typography is the design of the writing, whether it is printed or on screen. But perhaps today we really don't want to talk typography from a dictionary point of view. So let's go into some more very interesting definitions of typography, such as the definition from Ellen Lupton, who said that a typography is a tool that we use to shape our language. And similarly, Robert Bringhurst, the writer of Elements of Typographic Style, amazing book, he said that typography is a craft created to interpret human language. And when I first read these definitions, I had a little bit of light bulb moment, because really typography is the way we talk, but visually. So how can we actually conceptualize this visual form of sounds? Is it possible? Firstly, we need to try to define conceptual typography, as it is not a very common discussion yet. I am sure that we are all familiar with the word concept though, so let's firstly define the word concept. At some point, we would define concept as the synonym of a principle or an idea. However, philosophically, according to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, a concept is an integral part of thought, which also affects philosophical processes such as learning and decision making. But then if we connect both of the definitions into one, it means that conceptual typography is basically just type with ideas, which I am sure all of the typefaces that we encounter has ideas. So does that mean that conceptual type does not exist? Not so fast, because we will take a look at conceptual art. What does conceptual art means? According to American artist Saul Levitt, he mentioned in Art Forum 1967 that conceptual art is led by its idea, and I quote, "Idea becomes the machine that makes art." From this, we can think of conceptual type as a type design led by merely the idea, not so much technically, which type design is renowned of. And what about legibility and readability then? Is it not important? In the book Lettering of Type, by Bruce Willen and Nolan Strauss, it was mentioned that legibility and readability are hardly ever the aim in conceptual type design, because when the leader is the idea, the letter forms don't necessarily resemble standard alphabetical letters anymore, yet they exhibit the visual ideas within. One quick example here is the typeface from Amy Gray called Not Caslon. It was designed by illustrator Mark Andreessen, and it was then digitized by the amazing Susanna Lico. So the main idea of Not Caslon, it was created from bits and pieces of dry transferred lettering flakes of Caslon broken press type. And he rearranged it, and this type is so very interesting because it is a typeface, conceptual perhaps, and we can very obviously see that readability and legibility is not the main point here. So this already twists a little bit of the main definition of typography, that should be legible or readable. And thus, when basing type design solely on ideas, it means that we are sliding away from the very idea of designing type, which is a very, very meticulous task. And when talking about typography, we can't possibly skip the most important and interesting part of all, the history of type. We will be going back in time, but I promise that I will not turn this into a history class, so please do not click off yet. And we will also have a case study at the end. But why do we need to talk about history? History provides us with framework to understand not only the past, but also the present and the future. And in this context, we will understand better how type has evolved. Letters did not go back as far as the first living things. as we do not possess a writing systems up until the 1300 BCE, created by definitions. Before then, the practice of writing, as you can see here, are in cuneiform and hieroglyphs, dating as far back as the mid-4th millennium BC. And as you can see here, they are mostly based on drawings. Here we can see the Phoenician alphabet, and letter forms kept on developing more prominently from the start of the 1st century, even more after the discovery of the Trajan inscription on the right, which looks very familiar to our eyes right now. Although the letter forms have changed in shape, it had not changed immensely until Johannes Gutenberg discovered movable type. What we do not often mention, though, is that movable type has made its presence in the early 11th century in China, however rejected later because of the sheer amount of characters that the language has. And at this point, black letter was the norm, and if we are to read black letter text these days, we would have some problems. So that also poses the question of norm and legibility to our eyes and brain. This just shows also how our perceptions of letter forms could change over time and centuries, because after this, the Gothic form of scripts is rejected and changed into lettera antiqua, or the Roman script that we now know. Roman du Roi, we can argue that this type is the very first conceptual type created by Philippe Grandjean, commissioned by Louis XIV or Louis XIV to follow solely the mathematical grid. As you can see right here, it's very strictly mathematical. So it's very conceptual as well. Skipping to the modern era, in the early 20th century, this is where typographic movements were created, and type develops very quickly from this point on. There was a movement of reviving old typefaces, and at this point manipulating and deforming letter forms, which is quite normal these days, were considered gross and immoral. This resulted in newer versions of typefaces such as Guermantes, Baskerville, and Bodoni, which were previously hardly attainable, to be created and digitized at this point. A lot happened during the 20th century. With technologies advancing, people were searching for newer ways to visually express ideas and communication, such as sans serif typefaces used everywhere, creating the Swiss design. And this previously was not the norm, because sans serif was not perceived as something that is very usable, and so they are used very sparsely in headlines or in the titles. And in the early 1970s, microchip was then developed, resulting in much faster bit mapping and scaling techniques of digital typography. This increasing potential of digital design tool in between the decades of the 80s and 90s, numerous designers began to feel displeased by the cleanliness of the sans serif Swiss design international design style, and thus they used letter form as the subjects of experimentations. And this era is considered to be revolutionary to the typography industry. Also, the early days of the postscript at the same time. This was when people start to explore more bizarre things, experiment, create concepts, and this eventually results in increasing acceptances to diverse image and treatments towards typography, like how we accept so many different types of type treatments these days. These first few years of increased capabilities in using type digitally could be considered as both euphoria as well as mayhem for typography. Yet this was the strongest evidence that we have to show conceptual typography. So thanks to conceptual typography and the experiments of amazing typographers and designers, we now have so many different types and diverse type treatments that we can accept and not considered as being weird or too bizarre or funny. And now we will move on to the first case study, which is the study of the Fuse magazine. Of course, when talking about conceptual type, we shall talk about this legendary magazine. This was the peak and one of the most important pieces in typographic experiments, and I would reckon conceptual type design as well. Fuse magazine was the quarterly type magazine created by Neville Brody and John Wozencroft in 1991. Fuse had 20 editions, and each issue had their own themes such as runes, gods, religions, superstitions, etc. And for each concept, 4 designers had to create an experimental typeface based on it. So it's very conceptual, as we can see right here. This project had included some of the most amazing type designers and typographers in our era, including Peter Saville, Phil Baines, Tobias Ferrer-Jones, and many, many more. And as we can see right here on the left and on the right, these 2 typefaces are included in the Fuse magazine. They are so very experimental. They are so very conceptual, as you can see. And the one, especially on the right of Lasha's, it has several lashbacks as well. And one of type critics even said that Lasha's is an abominable typeface, which sounds funny to us today because we have accepted so many more diverse type experiments and type treatments. And particularly in an article in the I magazine in 1994, Michael Rock said that Fuse magazine had type designs range from the purely formal to the highly conceptual to the completely irrational, and we can kind of get the sense right here. However, it's a very amazing piece of work, and it's part of the it's one of the biggest part of the type history in our era as well. The next one, of course, is the Emmy Graham magazine, another legendary case which I am sure that your professors or your colleagues have talked about this Emmy Graham magazine as well. It was created by Rudy Vanderland Zuzana Lico, started as as a cultural magazine, and before and it developed into a typographic-centric magazine. Especially in this one, in issue 19, published in 1991, Vanderland's used typeface tablet Gothic, which looked very new to the society back then, and this is a very minimalistic approach as well, yet with a new touch to the typographic concept. But it did not sit very correctly with the audience at the time, which is funny to think about because it looks so very normal to us right now. It was not easy for both Zuzana Lico and Rudy Vanderland, but for us today, this is an amazing and beautiful piece of typographic artwork. In short, our perception towards typography has changed massively, and we have accepted a lot of new approaches. It is funny to think that it looked funny back then. Beginning from just a way to write down what we say, a visual form of sound, up to being able to express ourselves with, typography is magical. We can conclude that the extreme experimental and conceptual approaches to typography has changed our perceptions towards typography today. It has influenced us and opened up our vision to be able to communicate even better through type, whether conceptual or not. This topic is always open for debate, and as we have seen that our perception has changed so much, and with the massive development of technology over the past decade itself, what could possibly happen to type in the future? Will we have a new set of alphabetical letters? Or we will have perhaps changed the norm of our letter forms? Thank you very much for listening, and I hope that you have enjoyed my talk. And yeah, that concludes my very first talk.
Hi, I can't hear you. Wait.
You cannot hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. That was great. I don't know what you were worried about. It went really well.
Thank
Um, So I'm gonna so thank you for a great talk. I'm just gonna ask everybody watching, if you have any questions, please go ahead and add them to the chat. I have two questions that I thought of. One is a kind of a light-hearted question, and then the other one is probably a very broad question, and then you can choose to answer it however.
Okay.
The first one is, you said that you are not Times New Roman. So what are you?
Hi Nancy. It really depends from time to time. I think that I have changed a lot, and usually what I use for my website, so for my portfolio website, it's what I was thinking is me at the time. So I think that at the moment I am Aviano Sans. I think that if you are not a type nerd, you would not how can I say, you would not um, know what this typeface is. But researching Adobe fonts, it's there. So I think that I am currently an Aviano Sans. It's a typeface made by a French type designer as well. So here I am in France as well. And yeah, so that's my answer for now.
All right. No, that's great. That's great. Thank you so much. And the other one is that from your bio, I see that you've lived in so many diverse places. So you're from Singapore, and then you lived in you live in France, and then you also teach in Jakarta. How do you see? I know mostly, I think Singapore is probably the most multilingual typographic environment.
It is, yeah.
And then Jakarta a little bit more, but the Javanese is not as, from what I hear, is not as popular as it once was, but it's making a comeback. Um, Obviously, France probably has the most conceptual design,
Oh yeah.
but or maybe not. Maybe I'm mistaken. Can you point out a few from all of these places that you've lived? It can be something that you've maybe experienced, not studied, but just something that left an impression.
So actually, I am from Indonesia, and I've studied in Singapore for 3 years. And for me, yes, Singapore is the most diverse place that I've lived in, because there's so many people from all over the world who live there, and it's a very tiny country. So you can see every day different people from different ethnicities. It's amazing. And for me, one of the places that has the most type influence would be France, really, because as you can see in the presentation, I've mentioned that for me, the very first conceptual type, the Roman du Roi, it's actually made in France, not by a type designer, but by a mathematician. So it's amazing. And also for now, like yesterday, I attended the Alpha Critic, so it was an amazing typography critic, and the two critics was two young French type designers, and they're they're both creating typefaces that would go away from the standard typeface that we would know usually. And like in the book of Jared Unger, and his latest book, Theory of Type Design, he also said that our conventionality goes with the what we see every day. So I think that with the emerging type designers, what I see from now is that our perceptions of alphabet shapes will change in the coming centuries, I'd say. So yeah, it's France, I think.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much for your answers. Anyone else from the chat or from the viewers would like to ask Monica a question? If not, we could move the discussion to the Hangout space, and people can Terence wants to switch on his mic. Let's see. You need to, Terence, you need to activate your, there'll be two, I don't know if you can, you need to activate your microphone
Yeah, on the
by clicking on the top left
hand side, yeah.
icon. Oh, there you go. Okay. All
Right?
right. Here he is.
Tell me. So because I'm not sure whether I should type or I just talk. Hey, hello. Good talk. Actually, yeah. So I think just now Kalapi mentioned, or asked you a question about what type of type you are, because you mentioned about time News Roman, right? Yeah. So I think I totally agree with Monica that nowadays with so many typefaces, I believe, or type family, I believe billion. I'm not sure whether we hit that number yet. Yeah, I think we have a lot of choices. Being designer, especially me myself, right? I'm very indecisive. So, but I do believe appropriateness. So I think when Monica mentioned that right now at this moment, she's this particular typeface, I think it reminds me of today, this particular day. I'm some form of those Halloween cliche typeface, yeah, the iron bull, sloth, that sort, yeah. So so I just want to say that this particular topic is I think very interesting. It prompts us to really look into deeper about typography, because yes, when we learn typography as students or as lecturer teaching typography, yes, the basic things we talk about legibility, readability, but as we move on, I think this is something that is we cannot avoid. We have to talk about conceptual versus conventional. But I think conceptual, why is it very controversial, or maybe always spark debates? I think it's because there's one part linked to it, in my opinion, is that expressiveness.
Yeah.
So but whether expressiveness, it's something between conventional, standard, between conceptual and also the standard. In between. So I think because I remember Massimo Vignelli mentioned about the Helvetica in the movie, saying that Helvetica is quite neutral. There are that will barely expressive. You can say love in Helvetica, you can say hate in Helvetica, but itself is quite neutral. But for some reason, when we look at Helvetica, it has a certain look to it. So what I mean is, all the typefaces innate, they have some intrinsic expressiveness attached to it. But of course, it depends on our interpretation. So I think, I can keep on going on with all these things, but again, it verified the purpose of this talk by Monica, that it will have more questions. If we keep on discussing this, we have more questions than answer, which is a good thing academically, I think. Yeah.
Because I agree, because Eric Spiekerman has said as well, Helvetica is basically like an oxygen. It's there, but it's invisible. So people can use it basically everywhere, and it will fit with anything. So I think that it's one of the things, and also there's the imagine there's a slider in between the standard and unconventional, and we are basically right now going through from the standard to the unconventional slider, going back and forth again and again. And I think that in the coming years it will become more and more obvious, because there's so much more interest in type design these days, especially with the young people. And it's very interesting. We can keep going on and on about it, but yeah.
we have a lot of time, so we can keep talking. We have another 30 minutes to keep discussing.
Yeah, I think for me, my take now is okay, we don't have to worry about type or typography, or type should be more towards the conceptual side or the standard side. I think why can't we have both? We can have the best of the both worlds. You get what I mean? Yeah. So I think having choices, options is always better.
Yeah.
I think the problem is with kind of inherent human necessity to classify everything.
Yeah.
You
Yes,
have
yes,
to kind
true.
of put labels on things, and that
Yeah.
is probably the reason why
Yeah, yeah. I,
Because
you.
I, I I have a little bit of that too. Like, I love to classify things. I love history, like, yeah. But
yeah,
just don't overdo it.
because imagine if the new alphabet from Wim Kroll,
Mhm,
if we put that as the conventional, I think it's possible, but it will take so many more time, because really legibility and readability, it's something that is passed on.
mhm,
Because why do Chinese people can read Chinese characters, and Koreans can read Korean characters, but we cannot? It's basically just because type is a visual language of how we talk, and it's a tradition as well, basically. So it's another topic again. Type is a tradition as well. So yeah, it's very diverse.
mhm.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think when at the point when we have more treatment applied to the type, okay, and that is also another thing that I feel when we talk about conceptual type. Are we talking about the intrinsic structure of the type design itself, or the additional treatment added to it? So the additional treatment added to it could be the arrangement. It could be some form of distortion or additional texture added to it. Okay, I would say those are considered something that is a little bit more on the external side. Okay, so if let's say we want to go deeper to focus on the type design itself, so while retaining the intrinsic structure where we can recognize this is A, this is B, and this is C, okay, but itself can have a certain expression to it, so then probably it will be a lot easier, the topic. I mean, the topic can be a lot more focused, but when it comes to additional treatment to it, it complicates the whole things, yeah, which will excite more debates, okay? So again, not necessarily a bad thing. So I think here, I just like the topic where it prompts more question than answer.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
That's why, yeah. But also, it needs a lot more research on this, because there's already starting to be a lot more research on legibility and readability.
Mhm,
However, the topic of conceptual type itself, which actually
mhm,
had its own convention a few years back, I think in 2011,
mhm,
was starting to be there, but people are already so used to so many different typefaces now that
mhm,
it's kind of the norm as well. So it's the line between standard and conceptual type, it's getting blurry right now. So
mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, I think the norm is also another big factor because
Yeah,
during your presentation, you talk a little bit of the history you mentioned about in the old days, like during the Gutenberg time or before the Gutenberg time, the main typeface used is black letter, this category, right?
yeah,
So at that point, no one mentioned about the legibility, the readability of black letter. So it's
exactly.
when I just try to read a few lines, it's quite,
No,
yeah,
it's
it's not
very,
quite comfortable. Yeah,
yeah,
but at
it's
that time, it's a norm. When it's a norm, yeah, people just accept it. Yeah. So same when everyone is okay with the serif typefaces. Okay, in the late 18th century, early 19th century. I mean, is it no? Yeah, late 18th century. Yeah, 19 something. Where we have where the sans serif started to get traction and popularity. So I think at that point, like, yeah, why not?
yeah,
So I think once we in the 1950s, 60s, where sans serif hit the peak of its popularity, then people kind of, oh yeah, sans serif is not bad too. Yeah. So
yeah,
I think norm is also another
exactly.
big factor. Yeah.
Because the first the first known sans serif, which is the Caslon Sans by William Caslon Jr.,
Hmm.
it was rejected, and people really did not like it at first. But
Hmm.
then, coming to the Industrial Revolution, people are
Hmm.
starting to explore more and more with the slab serif as well coming through.
Hmm.
And yeah, just it's a topic that can keep on expanding and expanding all the time. So yeah.
Yeah, and just now I on my, I mean, because I didn't wear my mic, okay, I didn't wear the earpiece, so I just let it on. Then my son's like, how come the speaker keep on mentioning my name, because I named my son after Caslon. Yeah, speaking of Caslon, yeah, it reminds me of that. Yeah, okay.
So actually, Terence is my professor when I was in university.
A lecturer, not professor.
Yeah, lecturer.
Yeah, he's a lecturer.
As well. He is my mentor as well. So yeah.
So I think it's good that hearing from Monica. So I still remember teaching her about the basic of typography. So now we are going deeper to talk about all these topic about higher level of type talk. Yeah. Good.
I don't know if anyone else has any questions in the.
Can you hear me?
Comment section. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm having some issues, but anyway, I kind of missed a little bit of the last bit, but you could also see how Burberry, the new logo of the Burberry is kind of a kind of a nod to the Caslon typeface, the Caslon grotesque, which is pretty cool. Like it's like a super high fashion.
Yeah.
So it's like going from something that is considered a grotesque, called a grotesque, which literally means ugly or kind of abominable, to something that is now so fashionable.
Exactly. Yeah.
Awesome.
And we can also see that at one point when the Swiss design is emerging, people are going more and more with sans serif. But these days, people are coming back to serif actually. If you notice the fashion, people are going back to the serif. You can see that people are using serif for display faces. And it was not the norm just a few years back. It was all serif. So yeah, it's amazing how our perceptions evolve, and how later on conceptual type will affect this more and more as well. So
typographic seasons and typographic trends.
Exactly.
All right. Thank you so much, Monica. Please, let's have a lot more of this conversation. I just love the energy of the discussions with Terence and yourself. Let's move it to the Hangout space where we can discuss it with more people, and then let's take it. If nobody else has any questions, does anybody else have any questions for Monica? Let's see. Just scroll. All right. Awesome. All right. Thank you, Monica. It was a great first presentation and a great discussion afterwards. I had a lot of fun.
Okay. Thank you so much.
I'll see you in the Hangout space. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.